Welcome to Mishkondarea. I'm standing on the box because it's not very tall, and wearing the suit because actually it's important that you felt that you had a lawyer in the room tonight. Anyway, I'm delighted to welcome you to this event. This is precisely the reason why we set up the Retail Academy earlier this year, because we wanted to convene our clients, our friends, and talk about the issues that are really pressing in retail. And we've had an event, our Style Gallery, we've had an event about NFTs earlier this year and on big data. And tonight we're going to be talking about Metaverse. And I'm delighted that you could all tear yourselves away from the Metaverse tonight to be here, because clearly that is one of the issues that we're grappling with, is actually what is it going to be, what's it going to look like, how's it going to be relevant to me, to you, and of course to retail. Now, I've bought land in the Metaverse for clients, but so far they've not necessarily been particularly active. I've seen some professional services firms dabbling in it. Quite an interesting, risky move from my perspective at the moment, but it's all very exciting and it's all up for grabs. And I'm delighted to pass you to some real experts who can actually share some proper insights with you. So I'm going to pass you to Tom Grogan, who is the CEO of MDR Tech, which is our digital transformation business, and I'm sure he can tell you all about that. Thanks, everyone.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining. So today is hopefully going to be quite an informal panel discussion. We've got some really interesting things to talk about. I'm devastated to say we're not joined this evening by Leanne Elliott-Young, who's CEO of the Institute of Digital Fashion. She's sadly unwell and unable to make it. She asked me to send her apologies. I'll do my best at sort of representing Leanne and the sort of things that I know she may have said were she here. But we've got two amazing people on the panel with us. So first we've got Matthew. Matthew is a world-renowned expert in emerging technologies and their application to the creative industries. In particular, he's a specialist in immersive technology, so XR, MR, AR, VR. Matthew hopefully will be able to explain a few of what those things are during the session. And he and his team are building pathways for a truly digitized world. He was named a fashion tech trailblazer, changing the course of retail by Drapers, a digital world's influencer by Stylus for 2020, and a pioneer and visionary by Wired. Yes. Pretty strong.
Yes.
Big accolades. We've also got with us Anne Rose, who is one of my favourite people in the world, and is one of my colleagues within Mishkondarea and co-leads the blockchain group, is really at the forefront of legal developments insofar as they relate to crypto assets and Web3, and we'll come on in a moment to briefly touch on what that is, and is advising clients, including those that Lewis mentioned a moment ago, buying land in the Metaverse and all sorts of other commercial contracts. Hopefully can shed some light on the sort of key legal and regulatory issues that people are running up against in this space. I'm Tom. I'm CEO of one of the Mishkondarea group businesses. So we, as an organisation, some of you may be aware, are on a bit of a journey. We're sort of trying to transition from being this amazing law firm with great lawyers doing amazing stuff for clients to also advising them in a more full-service way by designing and developing their businesses and their software. So my team is 38 people as of today. I'm the only lawyer in the team. Everyone else is a blockchain engineer, a designer, a full-stack developer, management consultant, product manager, and we're designing and building stuff for clients. So hopefully you'll have a few different perspectives on the panel. Before we start, we take 3 minutes to quickly level set, because I'm conscious there'll be a very, very diverse range of understanding of what the Metaverse is and what the related technologies are. So during this session, we're going to try and talk about the Metaverse as broadly as possible. We're going to try and encourage you to not think about the Metaverse as a place. Obviously, the media portrayals of the Metaverse are these sort of dystopian, Ready Player One, The Matrix style worlds that, frankly, are often just a pale imitation of the real thing. I want to try and encourage all of you to think of it more as a movement, and it's a movement towards a blurring between physical and digital. At the moment, those things both exist, but they exist very, very separate. If I want to go and buy something today, I go into a store physically, or I go online. All the Metaverse is a blurring of those two realities, and it's a bringing together of those two realities that can hopefully allow you to do all the things you do today, but do it in a far more immersive, experiential, and hopefully rewarding way. we may talk about Web3 as part of this session. So Web3 it has meant a number of things over the last 10 years, but most recently has related to a group of technologies called distributed ledgers, such as blockchains. Often assets contained on a blockchain are referred to as crypto assets, cryptocurrency, and that is just one version of what the metaverse may look like. To be very clear, the metaverse is inevitable. It is already happening. There is no way that it is going to stop happening, and it is going to continue to be relevant in every part of our life for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Web3, we don't know. I think many of us, myself included, I know Anne included, believe that it can power a much more interesting world, a much more democratic world, and it has some really valuable use cases. Not yet, and we don't know for sure. We may well not see it. So today we're going to try and mostly focus on the metaverse, the thing we know is happening, and the thing for you as retailers we know is going to sort of have a really, really meaningful impact on you and your businesses for the foreseeable future.
That's actually a really good description of the metaverse.
Thanks, I made it up. Okay, so why don't we start then? Matthew, could you tell us briefly about what your role is currently, and in particular when you first started to see the metaverse emerge as a thing?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I head up the innovation team at London College of Fashion. We were set up in 2013, so yeah, next year we will turn 10, which is fun. We were given a remit back in 2013 to explore any emerging technology and its impact on the fashion retail industry. So effectively what we do is just build proof of concept with that technology and show it to the fashion and retail industries and say, look, this is possible, you can build this, it's real, it's coming, you're going to need to know about this, and hopefully accelerate the pace of change. And what we do is push that change externally and then bring back all of our learnings into the college and hopefully send out a generation of students who have a slightly better grasp of emerging technologies and their applications within the industries that we really care about. We try to focus the work into three main areas: how we use that technology to change the way that designers or brands are making their collections. So that could be anything from smart materials to smart processes. Change the way they show their collections. So Fashion Week is a really good opportunity for us to demo stuff, particularly around immersive technologies.
And now there's Crypto Fashion Week as well.
There is, and so all of these areas just continue to evolve, and that's the joy of just kind of working with emerging, and there's always something new. And then ultimately how we can use those to change the way that they retail their collection. So it's just looking at a very traditional fashion designer retail business model and showing how we can iterate and create something new, typically with an eye on being sort of 3 to 5 years away from commercialization. So like a good example of that is back in 2017, we were doing some early blockchain projects looking at how we could begin to show transparency in supply chain. Back in 2015, that was looking at how we could digitize lots of different elements of the industry. And so that started in 2015 with us just looking at it from a productivity perspective. How could we cut wastage? How could we improve processes? But we started ending up with a lot of 3D assets. And what do you do with a 3D asset? Yes, you can use it to design, but you can also begin to use that for fun, augmented reality, mixed reality experiences. So I guess from 2015 onwards, for us, is when we were really into this. And we really felt that beyond just kind of the incremental improvements in processes that you could achieve for designing and creation, we could push this all the way through to retail. We genuinely felt, and there's lots of quotes from a long time ago of us saying that we would be selling digital product. I guess it probably took until 2020 for things to really, really seriously start to change.
And I'm interested in, for those retailers, particularly the large ones who are still trying to grow year on year, despite having such big market saturated, and I can imagine they're constantly looking for their 12-month, 18-month time horizon wins to drive that growth. How do you go about persuading them to look further afield at the 3, the 5, the 7-year trajectory?
Yeah, and so I don't worry too much about persuading them. I think all we need to do is, and I think it's one of the things that we're a university. You guys have to run a business. I can tell you this is coming and this is going to be important. At some point, somebody within that organisation, it's a leadership thing that we've spoken about at length for a long time, is accepting that emerging technologies are going to play a part in how your business evolves. You can either be early on that or you can be late to it, and that's for everybody to work out. But we knew that 3D design and 3D animation and ultimately game engines were going to be really crucial to next-gen experiences for retail, and we're saying that from a very, very early stage.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say it's a really interesting story, because we were actually talking in the green room earlier about 3D objects, and actually there is no universal standard for them. And we've got the Metaverse standards forums that's kind of being started to be set up, and actually thinking about, do we create a universal standard for 3D objects? And that's a really interesting one. There was as well last week, there was the Vogue business Metaverse event on Thursday, which was quite exciting. And one of the things, there was an interview as well there with one of the nephews of Alexander McQueen. I actually took a note of some of the technology that he used to be able to create some of his 3D objects. So he used Photoshop, which a lot of you will be familiar with, ZBrush to change his 3D sketches that he was writing by hand. He used Marvelous Designer as well to create patterns for his 3D clothing, and Keyshot for the rendering and to actually make his, create the sort of qualities that you might see on fabric. And this is a really interesting one, because actually a lot of clients as well who are looking at using kind of 3D technology to, or 3D objects, or trying to create anything they have which is 2D and making it a 3D version of it, they're really facing quite a few issues in terms of looking at what licenses they're using. For instance, some of them, you won't be able to use it, say, in an open format like Second Life, but you could use it in a closed MMO like War of Warcrafts, or if you're using it as part of a wider remit in terms of Unreal or Unity, for example. And so it's one of the big things, I think, as well, that we've been seeing quite a lot of as people have to look at. But yeah.
And I guess there's an organisational capability that needs to be built in addition to the tech. So one of the things that we find a lot when we're speaking to large retailers, they know that the tech is coming and they know they need to be building that and thinking about what they're going to do, but they have a team that's set up and equipped to run the business they have today, and they need to know how many of those 10,000 people are going to have a job in the metaverse, or do we need to hire additional people to staff that? And I guess part of that horizon steering for you is helping them figure that out.
Yeah, for sure. And one of my colleagues in research, Francesca Benetti, ran a really interesting study into adoption of emerging technologies with retailers, with interviewing very many, and like fear was one of the phrases I remember her talking about very regularly. Fear of being first, fear of being last, fear of being second, fear of cost.
Not FOMO.
Yes, FOMO as well. All of those things, and I think that uncertainty, but particularly when you're talking about a new set of skills, it's very difficult to adjust. But effectively, what the industry is facing, what we're all talking about, is a shift from 2D to 3D. This is what's happening. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. There is already a war for 3D talent. 5 years ago, I didn't see so many students who could code in Unity or Unreal, or were making their... I mean, a lot of the pattern cutting courses were... To
be clear, those are the primary languages you use to build in 3D. Sorry.
Now we are seeing a lot more. A lot of our student base, whatever school they're coming from, whether it's the fashion business school or media and comms or straight design, are much more engaged in 3D design and 3D creation. We have to see more from the creative industry side to begin to foster what people will begin to understand as the metaverse, because I don't think there are as many exciting examples of what it could look like currently. I think that is one of the issues that many people look at it and think, it looks a bit rubbish.
I think for me, that's where people are still so hung up on that pale imitation thing. trying to replicate what we have right now. This is great, guys. We don't need to do this in the metaverse. Let's keep doing this in real life. But let's have us augmented so we have people who couldn't be here in person sitting on the front rows with us, and there'll be a hardware development journey that we need to go on. There'll be a software development journey we need to go on. But it will happen. It already is happening all of the time.
Well, it's crucial. It's the software development as well. I mean, the metaverse at the end of the day as well is it's code. It's a whole number of zeros and ones with a whole load. You have an overlay of lots of different types of data. And you have this manufactured kind of synthetic overlay on top of that with various digital assets which you can only experience really from within. And so we always have to kind of go back to the basics and really looking at, okay, look, this is software.
Yeah, and one of the things that Leanne here, she does a fantastic job of talking about is the accessibility that the metaverse can hopefully bring, and there's lots of aspirations about how it can break down barriers to fashion, it can lead to greater equality, greater representation. She says regularly, in the metaverse you have no sex, you have no gender, you don't have to have a sexuality, you can be any race you would like to be, and it all of a sudden breaks down these barriers in ways that are new and novel and interesting, and have all sorts of powerful societal questions that we need to grapple with, but are interesting and exciting, and it's just empowering creatives to do what they do best, which is create. So clearly, I've touched on a few of them there. We've got representation, we've got accessibility. What are the other sort of key pain points that retail is grappling with that you think Metaverse might help with?
I mean, I'll go back just to that point of accessibility, inclusivity that it can and will bring. I think it was in June 2020, we did a project with Riot Studios, who are just around the corner from here. And we wanted to create a VR fashion show. But a lot of the brands that approached us during those early days of the pandemic were wanting to replicate a catwalk show in a digital space. And we were like, no, that's boring. Like, we can do anything. Why recreate the real world? We can do much cooler experiences.
It was like in March from the fashion event when it was at Dolce & Gabbana and they had flying cats showing their clothing. It was amazing.
Awesome.
I did once read something that said if you were to tell Aristotle that there was this database which you could search anything on, called the internet, and people used it to make cat memes, he would be very depressed. But one of the challenges I've heard posed to design teams is, great, you've come up with these amazing concepts that we could either build digitally or physically, but digitally physics doesn't exist, so make me something that's on fire. Start to think about it without those sort of physical limitations, and you can get so much more interesting. The way that buildings are constructed is because of physics. Physics doesn't apply, get more creative. And that sort of big challenge is quite empowering for creatives. And for us, experientially, as we're experiencing it, it just means that we can experience things unshackled from those constraints that have held us back forever. Full disclosure, I don't get as excited about those things as I do about the operational benefits that we can have I'm far more excited, frankly, at the prospect of having people that couldn't make it in person on the front row in a seamless way that allows them to interact with you all than I am about burning dresses and flying cats, personally. All of these are the metaverse, though. Anne and Matthew love the flying cats and the dresses. Personally, I look at it from a operational, commercial. How do we build this as a business? And for me, these micro examples are going to be the most powerful and the most iterative that we'll see.
Out of interest, just to get a gauge from the audience, could anyone put up their hand if they do actually have digital clothing or they have a digital avatar? Amazing. Okay, so for anyone listening in, it's probably around 6 people or so.
Out of interest, the people that didn't raise their hands, do you ever play The Sims? There's a lot of nods. Okay, that's digital clothing. When we talk about the metaverse, I'd argue Fortnite is the metaverse. Again, if we go back to that broad definition of it blurring the boundary between physical and digital, going to a gig is something you do in real life. Was true until a couple of years ago when you could do it in Fortnite. It's that blurring of what it means to be real and what it means to be digital that is a metaverse movement, and I think we have to conceive it as that movement.
Yeah, and if there's anyone here who likes Fortnite, just hit me up because I spend far too much time. But yeah, I think that point of inclusivity and how we can begin to build these experiences was so noticeable, particularly from a fashion perspective. A lot of my team were in that experience and they were represented as a sprite. There was no identifying them. And you know, we go to Fashion Week a lot, and actually Fashion Week can be quite an intimidating experience. Where are you sitting? You in the front row? You at the back? Oh my God, are you standing? These are things where there's a hierarchy that exists. And actually to begin to remove that, I think over time these are things that will begin to appear within virtual spaces, and we'll need to figure that out. But there is at least the opportunity to level that playing field initially. But as to the kind of practical benefits that this will bring, I think some of those are really close to coming to fruition. I think you talked about people not being able to be here. That sense of presence that we can begin to create through virtual communication is going to come a lot quicker than even I expected. And I get to see stuff. And you know, we Zoom. Everyone knows how to Zoom call now. One of the things that we were talking about at the start of the pandemic was that it's very difficult to actually feel like you're in the room with that person. Like the development of light field displays, of stereoscopic displays, of reconstruction of humans in real time is so close that you will begin to see applications of that within the next year, where we could be doing this and we can feel like we're in the room together. That is...
Without using a headset?
Without using a headset.
And for anyone else trying to run a business in this room, I'm sure you experienced the pain point of, we found it, when everyone was at home, it was easy. When everyone was in the office, it was easy. When you were trying to balance both, it's so challenging to give the people that are on screen the same experience as the people you're giving in the room, and all of a sudden that begins to break down. And for my work meetings, that's the most boring possible application I can think of. It's also extremely powerful and extremely valuable.
And then again, connect to that as well. I mean, there's a question as to whether we'll each have our own digital identity, and whether we're looking at moving now towards almost this idea of self-sovereignty, where all your data is carried in your wallet, and then you only disclose the data that you want to disclose, and you carry with you the value from if we do ever move to something where we have interoperable worlds, whereby we can carry our data from one to the other with us.
And this is the beginning to be tripping into, we talk about the Metaverse, tripping into a Web3 version of the Metaverse, in which identity in the form of a token, albeit you wouldn't think about it as a cryptocurrency, begins to have quite powerful implications. And that's why many of us get excited about a Web3 iteration of the Metaverse versus a Web2 version of the Metaverse, which is basically just enhanced versions of what we're currently seeing in the mainstream. Out of interest, so clients are coming to us all the time and asking questions. What are the sort of the key heading subjects that are coming up time and time again when they're coming with legal questions?
It's a really interesting one. You know, one of the biggest things is ownership. And actually, especially when we're looking at the Web3 space, and we're looking at, for instance, NFTs, and actually being able to distinguish between the NFT itself and the underlying asset that's connected to it, and understanding as well what rights you have in respect of that, of those underlying assets. So I think broadly there are probably around 4 different categories of licenses. Mm-hmm. Everything's licensed. You have, say, commercial licenses. So if you think about the board, Yacht 8 Club licenses by Yuga Labs, it's a pure commercial license, which allows you to do anything really with it without any sort of caveats in terms of the format or any caps in terms of revenue. But I say this with a but. If you actually read it all the way through as well, they have the right to be able to modify and change the license at any point in time. And we saw that as well when Yuga Labs as well bought Lava Labs and with Meebips. and they changed it as well, so that actually they started receiving 0.5% royalty fees on all secondary sales. This wasn't proposed in the MeBips community. They didn't buy it in the first place with this in mind, and that's quite an interesting one.
So there's both an ownership and a bit of a governance of these systems and what changes can be made and when. So that's
absolutely
interesting.
And you go through all the different types of licenses, and if you look at, for instance, even the Creative Commons ones, there are so many different types, and they each have different rights. You actually have to look at all of them separately. So, for instance, I remember talking with someone the other day about without going too much deeper, it's a CCBYND, and depending on how you're using it,
enlighten us.
You can use it commercially, but you can't create derivative works. But then the Fidenza scheme, which some of you may have heard of, Tyler Hobbs, big artist, big thing of art blocks as well. And he's created his own version of it, which is version 4.0. But for that one, you can't actually commercialize it, and you also have to make sure that you attribute him in terms of every single time you're using it.
Interesting. So there's a huge ownership and just IP analysis generally. I know we've got the brands team, the Mishcon brands team are out in force this evening. So if you meet a Mishcon, if you meet a Mishcon lawyer this evening, it'll probably be from the brands team. But they've been doing so much work protecting in the metaverse, helping established brands make sure that their existing protections apply in those environments. And what about so I know the answer, and so I'm going to give a very leading question. What's the quality of the commercial contracts that we're sometimes seeing for the vendors in these spaces? Horrendous, right? Horrendous.
If they exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge for large retailers here, thinking about going into this space. We've got a team that are very, very fortunate. Lewis and Anne and others in that team, Liv and others I've seen around, are advising on buying land in the metaverse, advising on all of these things. The first draft of the contract you're going to receive is going to be rubbish. And so just be prepared that you might have to go through a few journeys to make sure it's something that's worth the paper it's written on.
I think hopefully, though, that will start to change.
Hope so.
And especially as well, we've got a lot of changes happening in the space legally. And we also have the Law Commission's consultation on digital assets, which is really exciting.
Talk to us about that then. So I know you're quite heavily involved in that. So headline of what is that, what are you trying to achieve, and what's your involvement in it?
So one key thing that we're trying to achieve in that is actually creating a new category of personal property. I think this is very exciting. We haven't changed the law in this space since 1885. So currently, right now, we recognise a chosen possession, so for instance something like gold, and a chosen action like debt. And we are
My rule of thumb, by the way, is if you can kick it, it's a chosen action. Shows in possession. If you can't, it's shows in action. That's my rule of thumb.
Absolutely. And this is creating a new category of personal property, which are data objects. And so they have three different characteristics mainly. One is that it is in electronic form, so for instance, code. The other is that it's independent of persons and legal system. And finally, there's rivalrous as well. And this is really exciting as well, because I hope as well that by doing this, we start to educate people a little bit more about digital assets, start to get people a little bit more in space, make people feel reassured as well about what rights they have in respect to those digital assets, especially you must feel that as well, come from university too. It's that learning element, getting people to really understand what they're doing.
And what's your role within the consultation?
So I'm helping to write it.
It's worth. So I fangirl over Anne regularly on this. It's difficult to understate how big a deal this whole thing is. I think it's unthinkable that 10 years ago we'd have been talking about ripping up this sort of two classification system of what assets are. And then for me, as the sort of technologist, thinking about it, it opens up all sorts of interesting developments in the future around data trusts and all sorts of interesting things that we are doing. On the sort of more emerging end of the technology spectrum. It's amazing.
Seems strange that in 1885 they weren't more prepared for where we would be.
I know. It's it's a shame. However, I have to say, I also am always somewhat in awe of the English legal system. I think it's a remarkable, beautiful thing that somehow we have this sort of evolving organic corpus of stuff that has adapted since 1885. Do you say? and is still broadly fit for purpose today. And without too much legislative intervention, we're going to make it fit, hopefully, for the next 150. I think that's an incredible testament to a robust and leading legal system. I think that's very, very cool.
Absolutely, and I think that also the courts are starting to recognise these concepts a little bit more. Not long ago we had the Lavinia Osborne case. They recognised NFTs, and they said, they have a realistic, arguable case that they're property. And this is really interesting. We're having huge transformations in the industry. There's even we've had service of proceedings via NFTs. I think the legal system is definitely. Suddenly become much more aware of all these different concepts and having to understand as well the technology that's in place.
It's amazing, and it's amazing that you're involved as well. Always one. I've got to ask: is this the death of the high street?
No, not at all. This is the reinvigoration of the high street. This is
Zara's just released digital clothing. £60.
I think. This is what we talked about for so long. This is new revenue streams, new experiences. I've been very critical of what the high street has been like over the past. It was always my running joke that if you went to Oxford Street, to any of the main fast fashion retailers, try and buy something at full price. It's impossible. You get to the till point, you're offered a discount. It's like, oh, fine, I was going to pay full price. Okay. But genuinely, I think through the technologies that are becoming much more affordable, much more deployable, you can begin to create experiences that return a sense of discovery, amazement. This is what our industry was about, is making somebody feel magical and feel excited about something they wanted to buy. It's been so clear for so long that 3D objects are, in a pure digital sense, like click-through rate is higher on 3D objects, anywhere between 20 to 40%, conversion rate is higher, almost double, return rates are lower. It's so glaringly obvious that this is where we have to go. And then you add on layers of immersive experiences, and we've been fortunate enough to build a few really big examples of what that could look like. So in 2018 at Fashion Week, we'd spent 2 years working with Lucasfilm, and as someone who was born in 1975, to work alongside Lucasfilm for 2 years was like, it's been rubbish ever since then. I've never done anything better. We were able to deploy a system called Live CGX, which was about rendering real-time visual effects onto a physical location. This was the Metaverse in 2018, and we spent 2 years from 2016 onwards beginning to build that. We were able to see dwell time double. So by adding huge immersive experience, you can increase dwell time. We did some research on the experience. Everyone who went through felt much closer to the particular designer, and their propensity to purchase physical products, not because digital product at that point wasn't even a thing. We had a motion capture performer driving the performance of a digital avatar in real time, right next to human physical models. It was wild. And actually during rehearsals for that, the mocap performer came up to me at Chiswick at the Disney stages and said, Matt, how should I walk in this digital garment? And we'd made 2 for the experience. Because it feels a little bit different to the other one. And I had to stop her and say, Vita, what do you mean it feels different? You're wearing a very fetching mocap suit. And she said, no, but it just, this one feels, it moves a bit differently. Very anecdotal. Every one of us got changed today, I think. Yeah, we've all got clothes on boards. What you wear changes how you feel. Every single one of us knows that. The notion that what you could wear digitally can change how you feel is something that we're beginning to get towards. So here we are. We all understand now 3D assets, much better for conversion, much better for engagement, huge immersive experiences, much better at keeping consumers in a space. We're moving to a world where digital canvases, our cities will become digital canvases. We can place consumers inside that experience. You become part of that story. This is a shift from kind of narrative storytelling to where you are inside it. That is really huge. And we're just at the beginning of finding out how that works, beginning to build the experiences that people find rewarding. But we know that it's going to be big, and already the figures are pointing in that direction.
And one of the words you used a number of times there was immersion, and one of the words I used at the start of this session was experiential, and I think both of those are things that retailers generally aspire to provide their customers and their shoppers. I'm reminded of the analogy of the way cars are currently laid out is basically just the way a horse and carriage operated. They've been structured in the same way since we had horses. Same goes for stores. We've had tills for quite a long time. We've had racks of clothes for a very long time. All of a sudden, we can unshackle ourselves from those physical necessities and have shopping experiences that are just way more enjoyable to be in. You don't have to go for the Oxford Street crush in the same way. You can enjoy the Oxford Street experience in a way that is less terrifying than it is today.
And I'm not suggesting that kind of every single store on the high street will become a massive immersive experience, but there will be a shift in the type of store that we see, what can be delivered. If anyone's been to the Outernet at Tottenham Court Road, you can begin to see where this direction is going. Huge LED screens, I think 60 foot high in the main space. That relationship between how you begin to feel what even content to recreate. We were lucky enough to go in a couple of years ago and begin to build something to test that. All of these things we're beginning to figure out, but what is undeniable is the type of experience is changing, and it will return a sense of wonder that will bring people out again.
That's interesting. Do you also though see the blend as well as, say, like physical items you could be wearing? So if you had, say, RFID, that's radio frequency identification chips, or NFCs in your clothing, in your brand, and let's say I have an NFT connected to that particular asset as well, which we could say is a phygital. I know you hate that word. But if I did a collab as well with another brand, and I then went into that store, I then might be able to get like discount, for instance, off clothing from that store, or things like that, and actually really bringing this whole experience
sort of
in
layered
together.
experience.
Yeah, exactly, the layering.
So I think it's fair to say that a lot of people are scared of this space still. And I think one of the reasons for that is, one, the dystopia that we spoke about at the start, but the other is this perception that it's a Wild West and that it's a place where legal enforcement goes to die, and you have no recourse, and all of those things are very, very scary. Looking at the IP points we were talking about earlier, how do you go about enforcing in the metaverse?
Enforcing in the metaverse?
Enforcing your rights, contractual, legal.
So it's interesting. I think you have to think about, we're talking with the brands team as well, so you need to do like a review as well of your portfolio. You need to break down, we're talking about IPs here quite a lot, but I think we need to really break down, are we looking at trademarks, are we looking at designs, are we looking at copyright, are we looking at patents, are we looking at trade secrets, for instance? We have to break all of these down. And then, we're getting constant guidance come out in this space as well at the moment. So the EU Intellectual Property Office as well released some guidance recently on, as well, things that you need to think about in terms of how you can protect your rights, in terms of extending your class descriptions, for instance, and making sure that you are properly protected within those relevant classes. For instance, Class 9 for virtual goods, or if you're looking at, say, Class 45 for retail services, 41 probably for entertainment services. So it's just, these are the sorts of things you need to think about. Also think about maybe setting up a trademark watch service. Think about buying Web3 domain names, to protect yourself from ether squatting. If you go back to the .com boom as well, and people buying up, website domain names, and actually think about how you can protect your brand and getting in there first. And getting in there first, again, that goes back to being proactive, right? Actually going into these spaces. And whether you're actually actively involved in that space, we've had some interactions as well with clients whereby they enter into the space, but not necessarily under their own brand, but they can monitor as well what other people are doing to really make sure that they're protecting their brand. And just monitoring the space to see what's going on, really, and just experiencing out there. So
that's really, and one of the themes we hear a lot from clients is talking about the so-say anonymity of existing in these digital worlds. Now, clearly, we know that isn't true. I know we've got a couple of guys from Kroll here who do a lot of investigatory work in the sort of crypto market in particular. We've got our fraud team describe themselves as the special ops of fraud. I think it's a bit grand, they are lawyers. But they do lots of asset tracing and have just obtained a huge freezing injunction in relation to crypto. So there are ways of biting in this space. And you just need the sort of, well, you need the legal support, and then you need the tech support to trace and track and hopefully enforce against it. So there's lots of ways you can go about it. So you said in the next year you think we'll start to see these things popping up.
Yeah.
How long until it is mainstream?
Until...
This is recorded, by the way. We're gonna.
So I mean, I think kind of that grand vision of what the metaverse can be is still a long way off, but we will begin to see improved experience year on year, and that's why I don't kind of worry about when is it going to, or when is it here. It's a movement. This is happening. But I think in my industry, there's a huge amount of time where people are waiting for hardware to deliver the kind of experiences and kind of hoping every year. I see more and more sites live tweeting Apple events, kind of desperately hoping that AR glasses are going to arrive. Like 3, 5, 7 years, I think these are the points at which we'll begin to see much better examples. But I think, there are so many technical challenges, particularly for wearing digital garments. Like we do a lot of body tracking and cloth simulation projects. You want a piece of hardware to deliver all of that in real time and adjust to every lighting condition that we walk into.
That's really interesting to say. I've got a friend who's got these beautiful digital earrings with augmented reality, but they don't move that well with her face.
Yeah. And it's still jarring.
And actually, that jewellery is one of those areas where you can do it better. You have sort of fixed anchor points. It's much easier to do that. And footwear has been one which is, again, easier to deliver an AR experience. Clothing and trying to recreate cloth, how it deforms in real time is, I'm not going to solve that problem. That's a mathematical physics problem that we're going to need the visual effects industry. We're going to need a lot of high compute power to begin to solve. And machine learning will drive all of those. But those will come and will get better year upon year. But I think the big hope is that, Apple will drop a pair of glasses and that we will all be walking around seeing the metaverse is still some way off. And is not, as you described earlier, that vision of what I think this is going to end up being over time.
Yeah. One of the things that it sort of brings us back to the very start of the conversation, where when we're talking to clients and helping them with their strategies, I say to them all the time, you probably didn't drive any e-commerce through your website till 2001, 2002, 2003. Doesn't mean it wasn't important to have a website in 1998. And that is one, just brand positioning. But I think far more powerfully, it's organizational readiness, so that when 2002 comes, you can run rather than start to learn to walk. And so a main part of my job with those retailers is equipping them and helping them to develop the capabilities required to succeed when the metaverse fully arrives. We've got a bit more time. Very happy to take questions. I can see one hand in the air. Shall we have some Q&A?
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Arabella. I'm from Petit Please, so I'm not a lawyer.
Congratulations.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you? So recently I was fortunate enough to be at a talk with Robbie Young, so maybe you know him. And I think a lot of the products that you've mentioned are coming from a supplier, so it's still that same age-old way of manufacture and consuming goods, but there's a really exciting opportunity for co-creation, and what with the recent sale of Figma to Adobe, the future is co-creative, so it would be really interesting to understand. Hi, also Walpole Brand. Anyway, I live. To understand what rights there are within co-creation within Metaverse or Web3, just because it was so heavily product supply the.
Do you want to talk about that? The
You,
sort of,
you go first, yeah.
well, I think it's an IP question mostly,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Well, so when you're looking at co-creation, that's a really interesting one because then that goes back as well to like, the licenses point that we were talking about before. Yeah, absolutely. So you really do need to start, depending on what you're doing, it is actually setting out in your agreement the terms of how you're working together, thinking about how the brands are going to collab together. Are you going to think about, are you creating a joint mark together? What sort of rights are you creating? What's the underlying asset that you're really collaborating on? And I think it's really, in all of these things we were kind of talking about earlier as well, as it's going back to basics in all of them and just really looking at what you're doing and then making sure you're drafting in respect to that.
I think there's also again, I'm not speaking as a lawyer, I'm speaking from the strategy side. There's a mindset shift that has to happen with a lot of these vendors where they accept they don't own everything. And that's hard. Their entire business model is predicated on ownership and monetizing ownership. That's a very, very difficult organizational problem to solve. Will it be solved? Don't know. Maybe they'll just say, tough, we own it. But we're helping clients figure out what do they want to be and how does that work in this sort of co-creative environment.
That's an interesting one as well. And I think as well, if people are using a lot of open source software, we've had people as well making sure that, you're doing like, you can do these scans, like Black Duck software as well, scans to actually make sure that, what the person you're collaborating with and you're using their libraries, that you can actually do it for what you want to do. And that's been quite a big one as well that we're seeing, because there's such a big use of open source software at the moment in people's GitHub repositories and actually doing the analysis of it.
And my design team are delighted, by the way, that Figma has just been acquired by Adobe. They think it's brilliant. Really interesting though. And I think Web3 brings in another dynamic that perhaps we haven't got time to properly dive into in terms of true distributed contributions. But in a Web2 metaverse, it's more of a cultural problem, I think. Hands popping up everywhere.
Great, thank you. Hi, so my name's Charles. I'm from YNAB, and I kind of think an underrated technology this year has been this ABBA show. And I think that really people haven't, I don't know if people just haven't seen it because it's been very like gate-kept, but I know Dolce & Gabbana were very heavily involved in the process, but like the 3D fashion element of it was kind of insane. And I think sort of blurring that line between reality and virtual, the virtual world without the need for glasses, without the need for headsets was kind of groundbreaking. So I'm curious to sort of see what your thoughts on being able to use physical environments to blur that line might be, especially in retail, perhaps.
For me, that is the definition of the metaverse. Is the breaking down of those boundaries. It's the erosion of what it means to do one versus the other, and so you just can do both of them. I would love if, in the history annals of technology, we can refer to ABBA as a seminal moment.
I think so.
I think that would be wonderful.
Yes, that was. So the team at ILM worked on all of that, and I mean it was very expensive to do, but is the example of how these experiences they have the ABBA state. I forget the name of the ABBA Dome, whatever it's called, but that space was built specifically for a digital experience. That's wild. There'll be more of those sorts of experiences to come, and just it is interesting. I think when they first announced it, there was a huge amount of publicity, and yet it seems to have faded away a little bit. But yeah, what's happening day after day there is kind of cool. But I love that it's happening. It's there. It's every day.
And you've already seen a movement in that sort of experiential event of they perhaps haven't got the budget that ABBA had to throw at that. You're pulling a face. I can tell that was a big budget. But you've seen the Stranger Things experience now launching in London following the latest season. That isn't anywhere near as immersive, anywhere near as digital, but it is this experiential. I don't know what it is. What are you going to? You're going to a trip on an event to an experience. It's this sort of hybrid thing that we don't really have a word for yet, but it's exciting.
But I think also we've seen it with kind of digital art, and I'm a huge Team Lab fan, and those experiences are not using in those instances, the most cutting edge technologies. And I was just at Disney Studios a few weeks ago, and kind of one of the best experiences I saw when I was there was just the use of LiDAR scanners and projectors. So you could turn any surface into an interactive experience. And then that just comes down to the creative. And honestly, just playing with the walls and seeing everything come to life is hugely enjoyable. This is stuff that I want to do. And it's the use of those technologies and getting the creatives in place to be able to deliver them are what will deliver the next generation of consumer experiences. Like, yes, of course, my team will always be pushing forward with whatever next technology is available. But I think you're right to point to things that are available now and are not crazy expensive for us to deploy.
I even like that thing we were talking about the other day, the little chef experience, which was absolutely amazing.
There's a little chef.
Have you seen?
Yes.
There's this. Yeah, go on, Anne. You tell the.
Oh, it's amazing.
What it is.
You as kids, you order like what you want from the menu, and once it's gone away and they've taken your order, you see a little chef on your plate creating the food.
Oh my
So you
God.
get to see everything that's happening really in the kitchen, but it's done from a little chef experience. It's amazing, and by the
You're
time
pulling
it's
the face.
done,
Take my money.
then
Honestly,
your
I think
food
that's
is then
Where's
put
the
on your
nearest
plate.
chef? I need to get in my car now. Let's go.
It's
I think it's New York, I think.
Yeah, it's in New York. It's
put me on a plane.
amazing.
Yeah, it's very, very cool.
yeah.
There was a question over on this side. There's a hand up. Hello.
Hi, this might
Did
be
you
a bit
bring
of
your
a
own microphone?
yeah.
No, you were handed a microphone.
Right, my audience. This may be a bit of an academic question about the data objects consultation paper, if you will, but and about the rhetoric of ownership. In my understanding, there is the kind of differentiation between control and possession there. So I was wondering whether the shift to a more kind of control-centric rhetoric will have a practical impact on how licenses and agreements and contracts are constructed, and in a way that kind of the commercial reality happens, or whether that's just simply a linguistic kind of difference there. So
That's a really interesting question. We don't actually see there being any practical change in that particular respect. And the whole point as well is of getting control is that a lot of the stuff we're talking about cryptographic keys. And we're talking about being able to have control through that rather than possession. And so it's talking through what's happening technically. And so the paper kind of goes through that a lot in terms of looking at the distinction between the two. But so far, we haven't thought that this would necessarily have an impact in terms of how we're actually drafting the agreements. That's a really, really interesting question.
thanks.
Any more? Oh, there's a hand up from Hugo.
Thank you. I'm Hugo. Tom, Matthew, Anne, really thank you very much for your time. This is it's great to hear some really complex issues spoken about in such understandable terms, so appreciate it. I'm conscious of your audience as well, so let's see if you can answer this one if you're able to. I'm interested in your examples, maybe good and bad examples of brands who've got into the metaverse. You know, if you want to keep them anonymous, sure, but if you want to also name and praise, also name and shame, that'd be all right with me too.
I'll go. So.
That was quick.
Okay, so bad. I think we've seen a lot of brands who have somewhat taken their following for granted and have assumed that because they are insert large significant brand here, that they will automatically pivot and translate very, very well to the metaverse. That isn't true. It's been proven not to be true. We've seen a lot of very large, very respectable brands not only not really make it a success, but experience quite a lot of blowback from their community or their customers because they see it quite transparently for what it can sometimes be, which is a bit of a cash grab. And I think we need to call it what it is, and we need to be quite careful of that. For me, my pin-up that I always talk about is Disney. I think they've nailed it. They talk about the metaverse, the next great frontier of storytelling, which I think is a very beautiful turn of phrase, and also summarises it quite nicely. I think what they've done very well is forget the technology for a moment. What are we trying to do? We're trying to tell stories every single day, and they are now experimenting, and they're still in an experimental phase, but they are beginning to try to do things that tell those stories more powerfully, more immersively, more experientially. Baby steps, they launched a collection of NFTs 18 months ago, 12 months ago-ish, that were basically just little golden statuette things. But importantly, the reason they did it wasn't to get a load of money. It was because they used it as a learning opportunity internally to build their internal capability and figure out what are NFTs, what does it mean operationally to launch them, how can that inch our business forward to what we want it to be in 2030. And having that broader organisational strategy beyond just doing it as a cash grab or a marketing ploy, I think is far more powerful, and that's what we try and encourage all of our clients to think about in this space. I'm not sure if you want to throw any other corporates under the bus.
I think Disney are interesting because Disney own a portal into your home through Disney+. They also sit on some theme parks which are clearly going to be an opportunity for these sorts of experiences to exist. So yeah, I would suggest they're probably one to watch. But honestly, the bad, yeah, of course I cringe every day when I see stuff. But I'm more excited by the fact that brands are doing it and experimenting. And if there's been one message from us as a team over the years, it's been just try it. You're not going to get it right every time, and you don't have to. And those things, if there's a cash grab, yeah, 18 months ago there was a lot of money to be made. I get it. There's a reason to go out there. And one of the big drivers, people used to look at our work with interest and go, yeah, it's cool, maybe one day. And then suddenly people are making money. That's a revenue stream, and it drove a lot of people to it. Some, it's more obvious than others, but at least there's activity. And from my perspective, I just want to see that sense of experimentation. That will lead us into all of those new areas, because we're not going to get from A to Z in one jump. It is going to need all of those experiments, and for people to be brave.
And that's an interesting one, because we were talking earlier about what's so great about this space, particularly the Web3 space. We're looking at this community and everyone being together and engaging. And I think as well, some of the exciting things that we're seeing as well is this whole concept of token-gated commerce and the additional kind of benefits that you can get, for instance, of ownership, for instance, of like an NFT, whether that's getting certain discounts, whether it's getting access to particular events. It's being part of this community with other people as well who love this brand, and all being there together. And I think that's really exciting.
This is clienteling. This is what the luxury industry has always done, is through the ownership of something, that you can begin to automate this experience, but make it unique to each and every consumer.
Absolutely.
That is an enormous opportunity. So, yeah, I think those are things that will really become very important to what NFTs mean, particularly to luxury over time.
I'm conscious of time. We've probably got time for one or two more questions. I can see a microphone primed in your hand. So we've got one question there, and I think that's everything. So should we take those two? Go on, you go first.
Thank you very much. My name is Nandi Nobel. I think I would like to hear if you have any ideas of how this generative AI side will sideline both NFTs and virtual objects, really.
How generative AI will... I'm not sure it will sideline either of them. I think it will make them more interesting.
Agreed.
I think it will make them far more voluminous. And I think it will remove the more banal elements of creating. You can skip past the boring stuff that you can automatically generate and focus on the great stuff that is the human ingenuity that hasn't been done before, and therefore no AI ML model is going to be able to generate it because it hasn't been trained on data similar to it. I don't see it as a threat. I see it as an amazing, empowering weapon that we will see technologists and creatives use. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's so much value as well. We recognise, great here as well in the UK, we recognise computer-generated works has copyright, and we recognise that as a really valuable asset.
Who owns it? Who owns the copyright?
It's a really interesting question. And you have to look as well as whether it's been the person who's created things like that. But we're going through a massive consultation at the moment. Cool. And as well, I think that's actually, we've had the results back from that. And there are going to be changes, and we're making some exceptions. For instance, there will be now the text and data mining exception that we had as well is actually changing too. So, for instance, under this as well, for instance, right holders wouldn't be able to opt out, but they might be able to have a say over, what platform there is, and in terms of fees that would be charged, in terms of access to the platform. But that's quite an interesting one, because you even create sort of an AI tool that, say, you're using. Let's say there was a particular, there was a hologram which had a fault, for instance, in a particular metaverse, and you then decide to create an AI tool to be able to go around to work out each instance in which there was a flickering of that particular hologram. And you could collect this data and then actually start to think about, okay, how can I create a tool that would make this even better? Because before as well, that sort of process would only be for non-commercial use. And that's now as well starting to change, which is really interesting. But I've got there are other colleagues who are much more proficient in this area than I am.
I'm sure
It's wild, and like we could spend a whole evening talking about the impact on creativity of generative design. But those tools, I mean, when we started looking at generative AI and where that applies to fashion a few years ago, and I had a friend at MIT who was doing some fun stuff. She started her own company called Glitch. We were beginning to, it took weeks to train the data, weeks and weeks. We were using tons, like 40,000 images to train our data sets and then run and show the interpolation so you could see the movement between the garments. It was really cool. And now, I just a prompt, I can type it in and instantly I get those results. The impact of that for creatives is extraordinary, but there are some really significant questions about what that means and what that will do for future roles. I mean, look, we were just doing some mood boarding last week, and instantly I can generate images and put them on a mood. But that is, for workflow, anyone in the career, that is wild, it's incredible, and we've got a long way to go down that road. So, I would encourage everybody to get your DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, all of it, do it all. It's going to create new specialities. It's kind of like the co-creation question. Like, I see Roy from Unity here, and Unity acquired Weta, and so now if you use Unity, you can have visual effects tools that can you start making movie level video visual effects. Some people will, but not everyone. I think these tools will develop new specialities over time, and where that goes, and new job roles and new positions within the industry will be developed through these technologies.
I'm conscious of time. Shall we have one last question, then everyone can grab a drink downstairs?
Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
Hi, my name is Nick. Yes, going back to your physical retail point, and I suppose the role of flagship stores, and you talked about tills and the racks and those things. So do you think going forward, I'll give you an example, Gymshark's opening, I'm sure you've read of the new flagship store on Regent Street, and speaking with Bren recently, he said, Nick, 20% of my floor space is just going to be apparel, only 20%, very small square footage of the store will be that. The rest will be this word experiential, which we always hear. So I suppose my question is, what the role of flagship stores, do you think brands going forward will dedicate even more square footage to the metaverse and experiences like that, or will they stick to the tills and racks?
So I think there's two ways of answering that question. On the one hand, you can say that they're not stores, they're brand centres, which is why you have real estate in these streets in the first place. It's to emanate your brand, not really about the cash collection, or one of the reasons. The other thing I would say is even the fact we're talking about it as being binary, I think is what we'll see change. At the moment, you either have to have a metaverse floor or a store floor. I think what we're saying is we're going to see that blur, and that's going to be the same things can exist on the same floor plate. I remember the discussions we all had back in COVID where we said, is anyone ever going to go to the office ever again? And I remember one of the best articles I read on that at the time is that large international law firm will instead have its head office as a brand centre in a key jurisdiction versus an office. Clearly that isn't quite the case, we're mostly back. But we are moving towards that experiential blurring of physical, digital and brand centres. Matthew, you've probably got a really interesting perspective on that.
No, that's the answer.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I think and for a long time, I think kind of that traditional route of how much am I going to generate per square foot? What is that return? Like the internet changed all of that, and the traditional brand journey or consumer journey of like the store was the end point. Like all of those journeys have changed. You might go to a store and then convert online. All of those things, all of the omnichannel discussions were apparent for the last 10 years, and so that shift has been necessary. I think it does begin to bring up the question around what leases look like and how brands. So those are the big kind of structural questions. But ultimately, yes, I think you'll see obviously these experiential units that are used, but also I see as we shift to a more digital world, just also a return of heritage, craft. All of those things will be celebrated. That not everybody has to do this. Like we can have both, and we should. I want my cake and I want to eat it.
And if you think all of this is wild, just wait until quantum computing hits. That's going to be a whole new level. Have a retail academy on that. That will be interesting. So I think we've definitely reached the end of the time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We've got drinks downstairs. Hope that as many of you as possible can join us. We'll all be sticking around, I think, so come and grab us if you've got any questions. Thank you.